All right, and we're live. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As you can see, I have a much prettier guest than Kevin. Much better co-host today. No offense to Kevin, but this is our good friend Lila, and she's going to talk to us today about communication. We'll take some time to ask her questions. If you have them, I'll ask some questions. If you don't, she'll tell us about herself, what she does, some of her background. But Lila, say hello.
Hello. What a nice introduction. Now, I know Kevin Ward, and I think he's plenty pretty.
Me and Kevin
Certainly
give each other a hard time all the
as
time.
I
Yeah,
am
but,
at this time in the morning.
but yeah. So Lila, tell us about what you do. Obviously, communication is a broad field, but
It
you
is.
have a very specific niche within that field.
I have a specific approach to communication, which is based on my work in theater. So I was a professional actress in theater in New York City and on a few tours around the US before I retired because I just didn't like the game. I didn't like the business. I didn't love being behind a character, where people couldn't really see and get to know me. So when I retired, I felt like I had this whole treasure trove of tools that what then wouldn't ever get used again because I wasn't using them in a show to play a character. And I felt sad about that, but I had to do what I had to do, for my own health and well-being. And so I moved on, and a couple years after I stopped, I found myself on LinkedIn and finding myself amongst this community of people who were thinking and talking and recognizing the value in different perspectives. And it was like I had landed in this place where people wanted to hear what I had to say, not the character, but what Lila Smith had to say. And gosh, it just felt so good to have my own voice valued. And as I was there and I was having these conversations just in the comments on people's posts, I would make comments about things that seemed obvious to me, but other people would validate and say, wow, I've never heard it put that way before, especially regarding communication. And it turns out all that stuff I learned in theater was really valuable for people who had never stepped foot into a rehearsal studio before. Stuff like, the basics of storytelling, story structure, how to promote something, everything that I learned about, getting people to a show, marketing, and most of all, just intentional communication. People having a hard time navigating conversations with people who are different than themselves, whether that's in their family or at work, or pointing the finger and blaming on this one, blaming on that one, and then somehow not getting ahead and feeling stumped. And I would give them some perspective like, well, if you're clear on what your objective is, for example, when you go into a conversation, what you want to get out of that, that might help you focus your communication. It might be more clear rather than dumping everything from everybody else's possible story into your communication. And that was an example of something that people found really valuable. And it came right from my work in theater. So I created a method of intentional communication called the Say Things Better method. And that's what we do. We help people to say things better, not cloudy, not complicated, really clear, and most of all, connective. I think that that's how you and I first met, Anton, right? Was in the comments of some conversation about, I don't even remember what it was. Do you?
So
There
long
was,
ago. I think that was like 4 years ago. I want to say.
and there were so many conversations.
Hmm.
There were so many big topics that we weren't afraid to explore because we knew what our opinions were. We were articulating them. We were supportive of each other's differing views. And we came into the conversation with the objective to expand our own knowledge and each other. I think that really made a difference.
Yeah, and I love that you. I mean, I've heard you say that before, and you still continue to focus on that, and that's awesome because it's the truth. I think that on LinkedIn, people feel like they got to make the best posts, and they got to put so much pressure on themselves with creating content. I think some of the best engagement is done in the comment section, right?
Absolutely.
When you actually engage and you actually write something, doesn't always have to be agreeable and just polite and you know interesting and you know on topic and not just promoting your own self. And I don't know, I don't see it as much on LinkedIn as I used to, but then again, I don't spend as much time on LinkedIn like I did, you know, 2017 through 2019. But say things better, like what, you know, what kind of problem are you solving for people? You know, I love the hashtag, like what, who's your typical client, like who do you work with?
I don't have a typical client. I
Okay.
mean, I refused to niche down. I do have little, like, I want to call them sub businesses of Say Things Better. So there is, the fact that I do ghostwriting on LinkedIn for company pages, for hospitality industry companies, and vendors and suppliers to the pharmaceutical industry. So those are two little sub businesses within Say Things Better. But yeah, I just refused to niche down because I really wanted to work with people who wanted to work with me. And that's not everybody. It's people who take their communication seriously, who have something high stakes coming up, something that they have to say, writing about themselves, talking about themselves, writing a bio, or preparing to go to an interview or on a show, or to get the thoughts out of their head and into a methodology like I created for myself. I just won't do it. I won't like niche down into only these people, only these things. But the people who work with me are people who feel stuck and stumped and overwhelmed and stressed out. And sometimes it's just that they don't know what their voice is or what they have to say that would be so valuable to anybody else. And I pull it out of them and I create a storyline with them that they can acknowledge comes from their own life and help them tell those stories out into the world.
That's awesome. Hold on, somebody saying audio is not working. Richard, can somebody type in the comments who you can't hear? If, or maybe it's just on your end. If anybody from the audience can type in or confirm that you can hear us. Maybe no. Anybody? Anybody going once? I guess they're trying. Maybe they can't hear me saying that. I need them. Somebody need them to say that they can't hear me because I can hear you fine. You can hear me fine, right?
And I can
Obviously,
hear
responding to
you.
me.
Is
You.
your phone on silent? Is there a
uh,
lag?
I'm not sure. I mean, I see Karen, Rick, can one of you folks respond and say if you can hear us?
I'll take a thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Or you can write your communication questions
Okay,
in the
no,
chat.
okay. So I think it was more on one of theirs. Um,
Okay.
yeah, okay, we're good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thanks
But
for
yeah,
letting us
shout
know.
outs real quick. Let me give a shout out to Karen, Rick, Richard. Thanks for joining us. I hope you can figure out the audio issue. Then we got Shauna and Georgie. Welcome. It's good to see you all. Thank you so much for joining. Ask questions, folks. This is definitely not a a single conversation. What questions do you have around communication for Lila? Right, her thing is saying things better. Um, this is such a hot topic, I think, today in our society that feel free to fire away your questions. I'll pop another one, but I'd love to see some from you. But Lila,
Have a
you know,
sample,
we
right?
talk a lot about.
People in the audience, if you have something that you're trying to say, ask me, how would you say this? And I'll
Mhm.
give you some feedback. We can do some free live coaching right now. Here's a problem. I'll tell you how to communicate your way out of it or through it.
So, I mean, actually was talking to a friend. I was like, hey, I'm going to be talking to somebody on the show that does communication. She's like, and I don't know if this is necessarily a good one for you to take or not, but she's like, how do you ask your boss that you want more responsibility? You're ready for the next level of, not whether it be promotion or just taking on more work. Like, I think that's a common thing that people have fear of is going there and having that conversation. Is that something that you can help with?
Absolutely. I think that that's a great example. And I think that what makes you nervous is that you're asking for a favor, and nobody likes that, right? So rather than asking for a favor, make sure you go when you're ready to demonstrate something that you've already done. So if you want more responsibility, start taking it on. Find projects that use your unique strengths and skills that align with your values, that fit with your personality, the kind of work that you really want to shine doing, and start taking action without being told. Be a self-starter in that way. Everybody wants that term on a resume. I'm a self-starter. But if you can actually prove it with an example of a story of something that you've done, to say, here's an area of need that I saw at my company. I knew I could help. I started working on it. And then once you are underway, you can go to your boss and say, hey, I've been working on this. And here are the people who've been supporting me and this. And I think that we could really grow this or make it bigger. But I wanted to talk to you about whether or not this fits within my current job description or if we should reevaluate.
That makes sense. So build a case, right? Like, I mean, build the case, come prepared. That's a great approach. Is there any like internal monologue that you say we should focus on in order to prepare ourselves for this?
What's interesting? I think that if we, rather than preparing an internal monologue, prepare an alter ego, prepare a character that you can step into, and build that character on the person who deserves the respect of the person you're talking to. And then assume that, because all of those elements are part of yourself, but sometimes it's hard to see. So I have a client that I was working with a few days ago who had to send a really hard email to a vendor who had not come through on what was promised. And my client felt really hurt by this, damaged, distraught and stressed out. And my advice was to picture, and she's uh, I guess very sweet, not forceful presence. And that's just how she comes across. But I asked her to bring in a character of like a Kevin Ward, like a tall, broad, middle-aged man who has been a leader and who expects results and who's collaborative, but commands respect, and that people automatically give a certain level of respect to. And bring him in and have the conversation with your vendor as that alter ego, as that character. And what it does is it brings out the parts of yourself that you need in that moment. And then ask yourself later, to do the work in therapy, why you think that person's more worth the respect than you are. But sometimes you don't have time to fix all of your mental health issues and trauma triggers before you have a hard conversation. So bringing in a character can really help for things like that.
I love that. I mean, I've heard like pep talks for yourself and all these kind of things, but like you said, you can't fix a lot of those underlying traits and a lot of those um, barriers. But putting
Right.
yourself into those shoes temporarily and being that person, anybody can be somebody else for a moment, right? That makes it a lot easier. I think that's brilliant.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like being someone else, because it's playing a character. It's bringing another person in, this fictional person, but really it's about tapping into, you can't be somebody that you have no access to. So you know what you're doing. Like if you're constructing a character, you're pulling out the feeling of being worth it for her, the feeling of expecting respect. And there are moments in all of our lives when we do have that. There are relationships where we do feel like you anticipate the respect of somebody. And those are usually the kinds of relationships where you're your most authentic self. Like I think actually how you and I are, when we talk together, Anton, I always feel like it's implied that we respect each other and want to hear what each other has to say before either of us says anything. And I think it's why our conversations are always so productive. So if you can bring in that feeling of talking to somebody that you have that relationship with, when you're in a conversation with someone you don't have that relationship with, doing whatever you need to bridge the gap, you're still finding those things in yourself. By pretending to be someone else, you're actually still accessing the pieces of yourself are true, that are when that kind of feeling is true.
No, I absolutely love it. That's a concept I'll be using moving forward myself, and hopefully
Right.
the audience enjoys it. We have another question. I think this one's more on the tougher side, and intentional communication is key here. Let's see. This is from Leonard. Leonard asks, "How do you fire a person?"
I think that there are probably variances in how this happens, depending on the size of your company, whether or not you have HR, if you have processes and procedures you've used before, if you're compliant with state labor laws, or if you are firing a vendor by explaining, look, we've already had conversations about the performance I expected and what about that is missing. You've had opportunities already to correct that, and now it's time for us to move on. We need to get our needs met. It's not happening here. And so I think that kind of content of the conversation is just as valid no matter what size company you are or who you're letting go. But you want to ask yourself first if you have done the work, hold yourself accountable, and then ask yourself, why you have to let them go. What is really missing? And then you'll let them in on that as well.
No, I love that, and I think even combining your previous advice with this advice would help. If somebody's tough, if it struggles with having those tough conversations, and you know, sometimes I've seen this done wrong, to where the person doesn't have a direct conversation of why somebody's being let go, right? It's
Right.
a really long, drawn out story, and it's not you, it's us, like that kind of thing. And I'm like, don't do it that way. Be direct, explain what happened, why it has to go down that way, and give them an opportunity to give feedback and move on. But if you can't be that way, right? Just like you said, put yourself in the shoes of somebody that can, or yourself that can, for that moment, and handle that conversation that way, right?
Right. I mean, it shouldn't be the first time you're having the conversation, right, about what's going wrong. So it shouldn't be unexpected. By the time you actually have to let someone go, it should be something that they saw coming, could have avoided, and it should be more of a collaboration about, like, what's happening next.
Yeah, and I think it's, I always say, if you're firing somebody, chances are it's going to be good for them in the long run too. I know that's a tough one to say, but it's not the first conversation you had, right? You've put in work into them, you did some development, you got them help, you did accountability. If it was a PIP or whatever it may have been, and then it came to a point where things are just not working out. And I've made mistakes in my life of holding on to people for so long that it really hurt their mental health down the road. Like, it
Right.
really, they felt like failures, and it was not the right fit. They switch either roles or they switch companies, and all of a sudden are thriving. So it's not always a bad thing. I think that's where you can always tell yourself the right conversation too, is like, you're not doing it to them. Like, this should have been, if it's done the right way, in a way it's also for them as much as it is for the company.
Yeah.
Richard asks, if how has your experience as an actor helped you?
My experience as an actor taught me everything that I need to know about life. So I don't know where to begin with that conversation. I'll probably just have to write a book, which I actually am doing. It's called Never Walk on Stage Like an Apology, and other life and business lessons I learned from theater. But I guess when I think about how being an actress has helped me, it's most of all about removing ego and connecting to myself and to others. And that is really a practice. Part of acting is identifying with characters that are different from you, and so you can play them and honor their stories. So I've had to kind of construct empathy, even when I've had to play villains, or people who have a life that is very different than mine, and take actions and have responses that are very different than what I would have in kind of in that specific situation that is written in the script. So one of the things that's been really useful is having to put myself in the position of the character and understand, what about the scene can I relate to, even if it's in a different set of circumstances in my own life. So, for example, I would never, kill somebody, but I might play someone who would. And I have to ask myself, what circumstances could exist in my real life that would cause me to think about things the way that character did, take an action like what that character took in the script, and construct that path to understanding how someone could reach that point. And that's opened my mind up so much to other people.
That's awesome. Richard says the character development works very well. I do that a lot.
Tell us more about that, Richard. When you say you do that a lot, do you do character development work on yourself to identify who your character is, or are you looking at who the people around you are and trying to build out a full picture of who they are? Is it both?
Hi, Krista. Krista says hi. Krista Malian, we both know her. But
Krista.
I hope, Krista, you realize this is not Kevin, this is Anton. But she's like, hi, Lila and Kevin. I'm like, Kevin's in India, by the way. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention. Folks, if Kevin's not here because he is in India doing a leadership presentation at an organization he's been involved with. Let's see. Karen says, it sounds like acting. Good suggestion. Rick says, don't work in a place you're not appreciated, especially in this work environment.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, right? Don't work in a place you're not appreciated. It sounds like recognition and gratitude are some of Rick Melton's values. And so that's where he's coming from with this advice. Some people, however, need to get paid and need to be in a position where they're not working with everybody who's consistently been trained in say things better, and so you're often going to find yourself in places where you don't feel appreciated. So but to identify the difference between feeling appreciated and being recognized and awarded for doing a good job, I think is useful. And also to know, do you have a future where you are? Is this place taking a toll on your mental health is a big question, but you can take ownership for a good part of that. I think in work environments, people, often do leave when things don't feel nice, and then they just end up in another place that also doesn't feel nice, and the next place doesn't feel nice, and the next place doesn't feel nice. You can bring a lot of those positive feelings in yourself by taking ownership of every conversation you have and bringing your best self to every single one of those conversations. So at least at the end of the day, you've been the best you can be. And if what you're getting back is not a thank you, but you're also not being belittled in the workplace, I think that that's an important distinction for
different levels of it for sure. And I think that you make it very real, right? Sometimes you have to make money and you have to make paychecks, and sometimes you can't just get up and leave all of a sudden. Like a lot of times I feel like our society is like, you don't like it, leave. I'm like, well, it's not that simple. People have bills, people have kids, people have things going on. But create an exit strategy, right? Start building that idea of how do I move on, whether it be doing my own thing and start a side business and that later matures into something else, or start upskilling somehow that you can, change industries or do a different role. I love that you're just not living in the clouds and going, oh, just take off. Like, no, there's responsibility, but I also love the personal accountability aspect. Like, I love that you're saying, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm saying I just love the personal accountability aspect, right? This is something that we focus a lot with Kevin, is just the human sustainability piece. And you can fortify yourself, right? You can do things internally or through health that are going to help you to withstand those things longer, so you don't burn out and your mental health is not as impacted as it could be if you're not doing things to sustain yourself.
Right. I think that that's a good point, to have an exit strategy. And why that's really important for people is that you don't want to be communicating ever from a place of fear and scarcity. You want to be able to stand in your own power and have a conversation with confidence. And you can't if you're afraid that you won't have a next paycheck. It really just blocks you from being authentic in a moment, because authenticity then feels like a luxury that you have to buy with capital that you otherwise would be spending on having a stability position to take care of your family from. So having that plan, if we could just operate like we always have an exit plan, right? Like build something always so that you know you don't need to stay wherever you are. But the reality is that some people right now do need to stay where they are, and identifying, okay, I don't have to be so hurt by what someone else said if the point of this moment is for me to get paid. If what you're getting out of it is the paycheck and you're not getting all of your fulfillment out of it, identify that as a for now moment. And then you can let go a lot of the personal hurt because you're really getting what you want. You want the paycheck. Other people can say and act however they want. And it doesn't have to be the main point in your day if you're focused on what your objective is, which is to get paid and have that off ramp so that when the time comes, you do have what you need to successfully take a leap.
Yeah, and sometimes pays in a different way. Sometimes it's like I said, it's an upskill, right? I stayed in a job for a certification one time because I was wanting to complete this really long certification that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the job wasn't great, but I knew that down the road I could use that. And actually, the job that I'm in is because of that certification. So, one thing that I'd mentioned to people, you're always negotiating, whether it be with yourself or with your boss or whatever. Sometimes it's an internal negotiation of leaving, but you need to have a BATNA, right? In negotiation, people are going to tell you best alternative to negotiation. I forget what the A stands for, but it's sitting down and saying, okay, what is my alternative? What is my plan B? If you've built out that BATNA, if you've built out that plan B, whether for yourself, for your boss, your platform to negotiate becomes much better. Your stance in a negotiation becomes much better, and your boss will probably give you more if it's pay, or start treating you differently if it's not, or make it clear that you got to find a way out of there for sure.
Right.
Here, Richard says, I tried to hone my improv skill as well. Thoughts on
Yeah.
improv?
Thoughts on improv? Yes. And yes, and is a tool from improv. I literally mean the words yes and and. And what it is an agreement to build on what people bring to the table. In improv classes, you're often working with other people. You're not just asked to stand up there and start saying things. It's about improvising based off of cues that you get from the people on your team or from an audience member or from a teacher. And you're supposed to accept whatever the circumstances are that come your way and build on top of that. And it's a way to keep yourself positive, to affirm the people that you're working with. So I actually created something called affirmative disagreement. It's a method of debate where we can take hot topics for conversation and take completely polar opposite viewpoints, sit in either seat, and be able to acknowledge by affirming what something in what the other person said. That you cannot move on to make your own point until you have affirmed the value that you do understand in someone else's point. It's that, yes, here's what I think is valid about your point. And if you can't find something that is valid in what someone else says, it's kind of a conversation stopper, isn't it? Because then you're stopping being a team with that person.
I like that he's saying yes and, because most of the time people say yes but, right?
Right.
And when you say but, you're negating their point. I heard you, but it sucks. Like I'm not. I don't want that point. We're gonna go with my point now. So I'll definitely be using that.
Right.
All
Good.
right. Let's see here. Don't ever let a job change be about money alone. That will bite you.
Also, a really good point. Yeah. That's true. I mean, it can never be that you only take the money, because if you take a job offer with higher pay, but you're then going to miss out on all the elements of fulfillment that a current role offers you, you'll probably end up, trying to find that somewhere else and rebuilding from there. Besides, you can always make more money, doing other things. You can have a side hustle. You can create something. You can, work an additional job. There are lots of things that people do to make up the gap in money.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, right? I think, especially because we have a global audience, I always tell people we have to remember that standard of living is very different across different countries. And we talk about a number, I've mentioned this before on the show, 75K in US. I think that number is probably higher now because that's a little bit old, but it's that motivator that once an employer pays you this much, money's no longer motivational, right? Because it meets the basic necessities and things like that. Unfortunately, some people are not meeting that, and some will say, well, I'll work for more money. And just sharing with people that perspective comes from a place that doesn't have enough. Their standard of living is different. But I like your point. You can work two jobs and maybe work more hours, but physically and mentally be in a better spot than one
Yeah,
that pays
some
slightly
people
higher.
can, right? Like some
Yeah.
people can work more hours and other people have children to take care of, or
Mm-hmm.
elderly parents, or, they are themselves physically limited in the amount of energy that they have. So it's also a privilege check there, which I appreciate that we're doing right now, to say, like, can I just take another job to make more money? Well, Krista Molian is in the audience, and she has a program that she puts people through. You pay for some of the best advice that there is on how to monetize your processes and what you offer. And I think that that's one of the things that's worth paying for, is to have somebody coach you in how do you take what you know, what you have, and what you can offer, and create a business with it. And maybe in less time per week, but ultimately it adds up to what you need to get done. The same system, the same process of building that for yourself. There are network marketing companies that people have a lot to say about that's negative, but the truth is that they are giving people a lot of freedom that they didn't have before to go and be themselves. And then when they have a product that they like and they're talking about it, they can make some kind of commission off of that. You can, do all kinds of things to make extra money. And no matter where you are in the world or what your position is, that is always true. You can even just start as small as, I have something that I think somebody else might pay for. And just ask yourself who that person might be. Kristen Galucci, another friend of mine, also, she had been awarded a LinkedIn Top Voice designation in marketing. And she's a great person to follow for really good advice. And she had given some advice to the daughter of a friend recently and wrote a post about it for things that she wished she knew, coming out of college. And one of the things that she said was, save your money, have a walk away fund, and also diversify your own investments early. If I could go back and have a money conversation with myself when I was, 22, and spending all of the money that I had when I didn't have any living expenses really to speak of, I was just on tour, I would tell myself, save more money, invest it now, build it into get a Roth IRA or something, and put that money in something that, like, if I had done it then, now would have multiplied into so much more. So it's never too late, but you're never going to be as young again as you are right now. So let this be the moment.
That's very true. Georgie says, yes, and is better than yeah, but for sure. And then she's asking, what is the coach's name? Can you say that again? Which coach are you talking about? You're talking about, there's, I think she mentioned two in a way, but I think the first one.
Krista Molian, KristaMollion.
And Krista has courses and stuff too that, if you want to do more of a digital approach, I think she can help that way as well.
And even if you can't afford any of that, you can start following her content on LinkedIn. She provides a lot of insight for free. One of the things, I know we talked about commenting before, but if you look at the comments that she makes, she's giving away little snippets of advice everywhere she goes, little tiny nuggets of gold.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about following people on LinkedIn, right? It's a lot of great things people like her give away. I've known Krista for a while. We used to engage, often and talk in person all the time. We coached each other. Definitely super knowledgeable and worth following, and definitely worth, if you have the extra funds to work with her in some capacity, definitely worth the investment.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Lila? If you guys have any, type one in. I think that the point that you made about starting something is a really big one, but I think a lot of people have fear. Like, how do you encourage people overcome that fear of not being enough, or, not feeling like they have something to offer?
I would say start with the biggest small thing you can manage. So everybody can do something, right? Like, let's say that you are afraid to have a conversation with your boss. find someone that you aren't afraid practicing that conversation with and start there.
Yeah, that works. I mean, it's kind of bringing it back to wanting to take on more at work. The initial question I asked you, similar thing, try to take on more there, and start with that. Richard says, thanks for this. Richard, we appreciate you. You're always one of our regulars. Thank you so much for the comments. And just in general, thank you all for engaging. If you have additional questions that pop up, feel free to shoot them to Lila directly, and she'll happily engage with you folks. Follow Lila if you don't. Similar to Krista, Lila for years and years and years have been giving value and continues to do so. So Lila, thank you so much for joining. Any final thoughts for the audience?
I think if you want to start with one thing today that's different than what you had been doing in your communication prior to coming to this show, it should just be to focus on what one thing do you want to get out of the next conversation you're having, and ask yourself what one thing you think the person you're talking to, your audience, what do they want to get out of that conversation? And if you can just focus on those things before you have the conversation, you come already more respectful, already more open, and already more focused without lots of chatter and clutter.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. All right, folks, Kevin and I will be back next week. And thank you all. And Lila, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everybody.